So I've set up just like a really quick like little thing so we can start working with stuff. Before I go on to a whole lot of stuff with procedural texturing, I did just really quickly want to go over. I had a few people ask me like what specifically some of the shaders did, or like some of the, what am I saying, attributes for materials did in Arnold. So just to like run through those crazy fast. I'm not, presumably you guys know what like a lot of this stuff is already. So I'm just gonna kind of like zip through it. If you have questions, just yell out and stop me. And I say yell out because I can't see hands raised when I'm facing my back to you. But anywho, so I've just set up this little ball thing, and it basically just has a little standard Arnold surface shader on it. I've turned down all of the settings for specular. So what you're seeing right now is basically only roughness. So the first thing is weight, and that's basically more or less how strongly the base texture comes through. A lot of times I just kind of ignore this. It comes set at 0.8. Sometimes I leave it like that. Sometimes I fiddle with it. The one thing it is kind of useful for is if you ever have a certain object that's blown out like this thing is, like this whole side is just totally white. You can try setting the weight down a little bit. And you can see like the object still looks white, it's just not exploding into overexposure here. So sometimes if you ever do anything, you just, again, like have something white, just like a little blown out, you can maybe play with this to bump it down a little bit, so it doesn't like stick out really weird in your renders. So that's pretty much weight. I'll just throw this back up to 1. Color is color. Diffuse roughness is, it's kind of weird and hard to explain, I guess, but basically it's adding microgeometry, it's adding like basically a tiny noise bump map to the whole thing. The overall effect is basically your material becomes slightly darker. What's actually happening is the light is hitting that microgeometry and casting more shadows on your object, which is why it becomes darker. That's why when I turn diffuse roughness up, this area kind of shows up better because it's catching more light from when the light hits that little microgeometry on the side there, it's casting more shadows. It's like this compared to no diffuse roughness. Usually if your weight's not exploded, it just kind of looks like it's making everything darker. And then metalness pretty much makes something look metallic. The only real difference between metalness and roughness is that metalness takes into account the base color. So it basically turns whatever color, or like whatever your reflection is, it overlays it with the color of the base, or like the default color of your object, which is why everything looks blue here. So I have this other little ball just like hanging out here. And this ball is pretty much just, it's basically just roughness, or specular, sorry. So I've taken the weight and all the diffuse roughness stuff, set this down to 0, so basically all you're looking at is specular right now. And again, you can see, so for that, if I set roughness down to 0, the reflections look pretty much the same in terms of like shape and sharpness. It's just not, overlaying the base color of white onto those reflections. If I set weight back up, it's gonna, look a little different. But that's basically the difference between metalness and just roughness. Metalness is actually going to take this base color and kind of tint your whole reflection thing. And then weight for specular, pretty much just an opacity slider for your specular. If you need it to be less intense, you just take the weight down. Color, if you're so inclined. So color is where you can also tint, if you want, you can make this like hot pink. And this is just going to pretty much tint your specular with whatever color you're looking at. This is completely unrealistic, but I do like it a little too much. But usually you'd only change that color if you're looking to do something like metal. Because a lot of times, like normal objects, they'll just have like a white specular. If you look like a soda can, which has, stuff overlaid on top of the metal, or like a piece of plastic, it's just like a white reflection, or like a white specular. But stuff like metal, where like gold, if you wanted to make gold, gold is yellow, you would make the color yellow, and then set your specular to be yellow, and then you would have something gold looking. So like this is more or less how you would gold by setting the specular color to 0. This is hideous, but anyway. All right. Roughness is pretty self-explanatory. Only note for roughness is most things don't have complete and total roughness. They'll have like a teeny bit of specular to it. It's more like a principle thing. So yeah. And then IOR, index of refraction, that can also be used to control your specular highlights as well as like your transmission weight. So you'll notice when I set this up higher, much more of the surface actually catches the light and the reflection. It turns like way chromier. When I set it down to 0, or very low value, you'll notice that the specular highlights are really only showing up around the very edge of the object, and kind of like on this bright reflection here. But this is also called like the Fresnel effect. Probably also pronouncing that wrong, but basically it's how much of the side angle is reflective. So if you look at this, like as I slowly bump this up, like watch, you'll see the sort of rim around the side here. That'll just sort of start slowly growing closer to the center of the object, if that makes sense. But just know that you can fiddle with this to achieve different looks in your material. And then anisotropy is, I am rubbish at like describing this and making it function, but you know, so there's like a certain type of metal. Let's see if I have it pulled open. Not that one. When in doubt, textures.com. Hiya. So there's like a specific type of metal that has, you'll notice it has reflections that are almost, I missed it. Like they seem to go in a certain direction, this stuff. It's like this kind of metal, where it's like brushed or whatever, and you'll notice there's like, it's shiny and it's reflective, but it's in a very sort of linear pattern. That's basically what anisotropy is. It creates that little like hot streak of reflection in your material. For some reason, whenever I slider this, it doesn't like me, but like if you look up pictures of it on the internet, it comes up fine. It's like my weird personal pet peeve. Sometimes it works a little bit better if I slider value it. So I mean, you can see a little bit. So like when it's at 0, if I turn the roughness up, it's a fairly like soft diffuse shadow, and then when I set this higher, it gets a little bit crisper, like a little bit linier, to use the technical terms. And then rotation is basically just controlling the angle area of the anisotropy. So like you can, you know, basically manually manipulate the direction that your highlights are going in. And if you wanted to, you could map in, so like if you look at the texture here on textures.com, you'll see they have like a map for anisotropy angle, and that's basically just, it works kind of like a normal map, but it's basically just telling the computer to reflect in different directions, which is how they get that sort of circular brushed effect, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's pretty much just like the basic textures in case anyone was like wondering, you know, what any particular ones were. I feel like we've gone over transmission, so I'm not going to go over that like a whole heck of a lot. I'm just going to say really quick, I'm going to turn anisotropy down. So the only thing that I would really go over is like, so depth, and it's, because of my luck, it's probably not going to show up on these renders. But that's usually going to be something like if you, usually it'll end up making more shadows below your object, and kind of give a little bit of extra detail to it. So basically the depth is how far Maya is going to shoot light rays through your object. So sometimes it's just going to sit at, it's going to like hit your object and then stop, or go halfway through your object if it's really thick and then stop. So the higher you bump this, it'll just sort of shoot rays deeper through your material, which sometimes takes longer to render, but can create like quite nice and or more realistic effects. Apart from that, scatter anisotropy basically just adds a little bit of variation into the light scattering through your glass. And then dispersion, I honestly barely ever play with this. It just sort of, yeah. You add extra roughness to your glass, which is, actually that's a pretty cool effect. I'm not gonna lie, I've never actually really played with the slider before, but it does create a slightly different effect than just roughing up your object. Interesting. But yeah. So anyway, that's pretty much, again, basic attributes of Arnold shaders. Anyone have any questions about that? All right. All right. Hopefully